Good morning, everybody. My name is Liz Hill, and I'm the Director of Instruction for West Vancouver Schools. And I'm very pleased to welcome you all here to our parent education session today, titled Supporting Your Child with Remote Learning at Home. This is the second parent education session that we've offered as West Vancouver Schools, the first being last Friday to a very well subscribed session around West Vancouver Schools' digital resources. Before we get started today, I do want to take a moment to recognize that we're on the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. All of us here in West Vancouver Schools are very thankful to our friends and colleagues of the nation who are working to guide us with our understanding of the history, its land, and its people. Today, we're proud to be learning on this land and appreciate that fact that you've all taken the time to learn with us. So on to today's session. We recognize that these are really unique and different times for parents and families who've been asked to support their children with remote learning. We've been amazed by the tremendous job that parents, teachers, students have done pivoting and engaging with those remote learning plans. With that being said, we recognize that it does come with its challenges. And today we wanted to take a few moments to share with you some suggestions in the areas of planning, organization, and executive functioning skills. Today we have an amazing team of West Vancouver Schools experts here to share some key strategies and resources in these areas to support you as parents and families with remote learning at home. Leading our learning today is Alison DeBeer, one of our district learning support teachers, but in the background we also have many others to support us in the answering of questions or to add additional information that may come up during the presentation. In the background, we have Maureen McLean, one of our district occupational therapists, Kristen Sikovich, behavior analyst, and Sarah Heinz, one of our youth workers. Before I do turn it over to Alison to begin our parent education session today, I would like to remind all of our participants that we do have a question and answer feature going, and this will be monitored by our team. If you have questions, please feel free to write them in the Q&A section, and we will try to get to as many as we can. We have set aside some time at the end of our presentation today to address as many questions as we can. So I think that's all of our housekeeping pieces, and I would like to introduce Alison DeBeer.
Hi everyone, I'm Alison. I'm a learning support teacher with West Vancouver School District, and I'm so pleased to be with you here today. All right, so let's get started. So today we're going to be talking specifically about planning, organization, and executive functioning skills in the context of supporting your child with remote learning at home. So as we get going, we're going to start with an overview. What are executive functioning skills? How do they develop? And then we're going to get into some more specific strategies and ideas to support them. And then we'll save about 15 minutes or so at the end for that question and answer conversation period. Please do use that chat function to input your questions. We'd love to hear them. All right, so we're going to start by grounding our conversation. What are executive functioning skills? We're going to use this understanding as a foundation to consider structuring support and learning at home. So what are they? Well, one way to think about it is like having an air traffic control center in our brain. These skills help us focus on multiple streams of information at the same time, monitor errors, make decisions, and revise plans. They're the brain functions that enable us to engage in problem solving and goal-directed behavior. They allow us to control impulses, make plans, and stay focused. So pretty important. We can actually consider these into two different categories: executive skills involved in thinking or cognition, and those involved in doing or behavior. Right? So if we're thinking about the skills involved in thinking, we're talking about working memory, planning and prioritization, time management, organization, self-monitoring. In the video that you'll have access to following this session, I go into these in a little bit more detail as well. When we're talking about executive skills involved in doing or behavior, this would include inhibition, emotional control, sustaining attention, task initiation, and flexibility. And again, there's going to be more details on each of these in the video that will follow. So how do these skills develop? So I think it's really important to note that we're not born with these skills, but rather we're born with the potential to develop them depending on our experiences during infancy and throughout childhood into adolescence. So these skills are developed through experience and repeated practice over time. They're not fixed attributes, and they can be supported, developed, and taught. So if we want to practice developing these skills, these are just three ideas that we wanted to share that can help practice and strengthen these skills. So the first one that we'll talk about is one called job talk. So language really does matter. So job talk is a relatively simple strategy that involves changing the way we phrase requests or directions. So essentially what we're going to do is we change the action we want our child to do into a job by simply adding to the end of it. For example, instead of we want you to go wash the dishes, we want you to go be a dishwasher. So it's a really subtle shift, but it actually helps the child imagine their role and steps better. They've actually done research on this with adults in voting. They've had two groups. They asked one group that they're to go vote, and they told the other group that they're going to go be voters. They gave them the job of being a voter, and they found that that second group that had the job actually had a higher turnout at the polls. So for children, it's a great strategy to use with chores or schoolwork. Instead of saying it's time to go do your work, you could say it's time to go be a learner, a reader, a writer, etc. So games and contemplative practices are another great way to practice and build attention and inhibition skills. So there's lots of games that we can play to boost attention. Many are really great for younger children, like red light, green light, freeze, melting snowman, or other types of controlled movement activities. And for older students, contemplative practices like notice 5 things, or mindfulness exercises can also support self-awareness and attention. Just a note, you'll see that we will have some handouts with these ideas following the sessions. And again, it'll give a little bit more detail on these. So before we jump into some of the more specifics, I just wanted to have a note on time. So this is called the time horizon. And the video on executive functioning skills, again, we'll go into more detail on this, but generally the point here is to remember that our concept of time is largely developmental, and this is going to impact the types of supports that we would use. So the chart here has the age and then kind of how far into the future the person can meaningfully plan for. Again, just a little bit of a caveat. The ages here are really rough guidelines. Developmental age and chronological age don't always align. I know for myself, I'm my partner, 30 plus, 8 to 12 weeks, not always, right? So just something to be mindful of. So when we're talking about supporting time, a couple of ideas that can help us build an understanding of time and time management could include using a timer and then also making time a bit more concrete. So a timer or a clock is really useful to put limits around certain tasks so that they don't feel like they're going to drag on forever. Even if children are still developing an understanding of time, we can teach them to move between activities based on a timer to increase independence. For example, you can use the timer on your phone to get them to start an activity. They can press start. Once the timer goes off, they can hit end. And then when you transition to the next activity, we can get them to press the timer again. So again, this is going to help them have some independence and transition on their own between tasks a bit more fluidly. Another idea, this is particularly useful with younger children or children who are still getting to understand the concept of time, is to actually draw it out. So time is quite abstract. Drawing it out can help make it more concrete and tangible. So if we consider a pie chart with a complete circle representing the full sweep of an hour, a semicircle representing 30 minutes, a quarter piece, 15 minutes, and so forth. We can help children to see the relative size of chunks of time, and this is going to help them understand short versus long tasks and build an understanding of time and time management skills. So what we can do is we can actually pair these time pieces with specific activities or tasks. We can either draw it next to the task, or if we have them cut out as pieces, we can just put them next to the task as well, or hand it to them even. So another thing we can do is we can actually pair these two strategies together. So we've got a clock, which is our timer, and then we can actually use that drawing the chunks of time and pair them together. So if you have a clock with a glass face, you can actually use a whiteboard marker to draw and shade in pieces of time. Using an analog clock rather than a typical countdown timer, like the one that we do have on our phones, that can be helpful since the time doesn't disappear and the entire chunk of time is visible, and children can see the sweep of time as the hand moves forward through that shaded area. So if we use this, we can even add post-it notes to mark maybe midpoint check-ins, which are great opportunities to reflect time on tasks and progress and make adjustments, right? That flexibility. And then we can also add time for breaks and things like that. If you have different color markers, you can even separate it into different types of tasks if you want to. So we've talked a little bit about what executive skills are, how they develop, some ways to practice them, and then just the idea of time. Moving forward, now we're going to talk a little bit about more specific strategies related to planning, organization, and time management in the context of those continuity of learning plans. Excuse me. So we're going to start by thinking broadly with some structure. So just considering that at school, there is a lot of structure, right? The days are structured, the tasks are structured. There's a start time, a schedule, or shape of the day with a progression of learning activities. There's breaks, there's meal times, there's an end time, right? The day routines and learning tasks are typically broken into steps. Essentially, this means that planning, organization, and time management supports, they're all embedded in the day and the teaching or instruction. There's a framework, right? Obviously, this isn't something we can replicate exactly at home, especially if we're trying to, juggle and balance our own work, caring for multiple children or other family members, and all those other responsibilities that I know we're all struggling with, right? That being said, there are some supports and structures that can be helpful and take some of the pressure off. So we're going to start thinking broadly with setting routines and schedules, and then we'll take a more focused view with supports for specific tasks, activities, routines, and assignments. So we're going to start by thinking big. So a good place to start would be with a daily schedule. When we're looking at daily schedules, we encourage you to think about the demands of both adult and child schedules and how they might align. This would also include elements of choice throughout the day and physical spaces for learning. The video that you'll see following this session on routines, again, goes into this in a little bit more detail, but we'll move on for now. Again, in a daily schedule, these are just some of the elements that you might want to consider, right? So the typical things that you need to accomplish throughout the day, and then a balance of the learning time, play time, outside time, right? Family connection time, those sorts of things. So again, you might find that having an overall flow of the day posted in your home could be useful. This one example includes the time, the title of the event, and then a brief description. So this could be as broad or specific as you like. It could include pictures and words, or just pictures, or just words, or even just simply the time and a broad event with no additional details. It could be specific, for an individual child, or it could be more for the whole family, right? So it's whatever works for your context. This is just one example. I'm going to show two more examples. These ones are very similar. They actually came from my niece and nephew, so thank you to them for sharing these. And can you tell that my sister is a teacher? The reason that I wanted to show you this one is it kind of combines a few elements. So as you can see, this schedule covers a typical work day, right? 8:30 to 2:30. My sister's working from home. She needs her two children who are in grade 2 and pre-K to have some degree of independence. There's a time frame here. Within the time, there's a series of tasks for them to complete. The tasks have pictures and words. My niece here is a little bit older. You can also see that as she completes the tasks, she flips them over and there's a check mark, right? This really allows her to track her progress throughout the day, have a little bit of independence, and feel a sense of pride in completion as well. You can see on her schedule, she's also drawn in the time, again, making that time a little more concrete. And this is my nephew's. As you can see, his schedule is a little simpler. It's just got pictures. He's not yet reading. So again, whatever is meaningful to your child. Another example here. This is just written on Post-it notes, right? It doesn't have to be fancy as long as it's meaningful and your child uses it, you reflect on it, and you can make adjustments to it as well. So we're going to move on from talking about schedules and talk about more long-range plans and organization. So this is an example about, an example for older students who might have multiple tasks across subjects or multi-step projects. So it can really help to break it down and to map it out, right? So taking it from a computer and actually making it more tangible. So for example, for each step or activity or maybe assignment, depending on how much you want to break it down, you could write it on a Post-it paper or a piece of paper, or even jot it out on a whiteboard. And then the idea here is that when you can see it all in one place, you can then kind of consider how much each step is going to take and arrange it to create a schedule for the day or the week, right? We've actually seen this used with desktop calendars and Post-it notes, so you can actually move them into a calendar as well, if that's something that might be supportive. So we're gonna transition a little bit now. We talked relatively big with daily schedules or weekly plans here. Now we're gonna focus a little bit more smaller scale with supports for specific tasks, activities, or even routines within your day. So appropriately, the first thing that we're going to talk about in this context is a first then schedule. This is really helpful with young children and others who do best with 2 steps. You can also use it to help with motivation. So what you can do is you can actually position a less preferred activity first, followed by a favorite activity second. The idea behind this is it's almost like grandma's rule, right? First you eat your dinner and then you get your dessert. For older children, we can also use this principle to create choice time at the end of the day or after every 2 or 3 activities to help motivate them to follow the schedule. So in that case, the first would actually have 3 steps instead of just the 1 that this illustration shows. A menu of activities is another way to break down a schedule and also incorporate some choice and autonomy. In this case, the child has complete choice in the order that they do things, so long as they complete all the tasks within the menu within a time period, for example, throughout the day. You could even stretch it over 1 or 2 days, right? Again, totally context dependent. So this is another example. This would be with a routine that has multiple steps that we would want to encourage our child to become a bit more independent with, right? So this could be getting ready in the morning, or even washing hands, right? So something that has multiple steps. And again, however you want to use it, whether it be primarily with words or pictures or a combination of the two, will depend on your individual child. All right, so moving on, make a plan, say your plan is another strategy to help children complete multi-step tasks or a series of tasks. So it's really interesting to consider that when we're planning to complete a task, it typically happens in a different space than the task itself. So what we're actually doing is we're imagining ourselves in another space at a future time. It's almost like a mental dress rehearsal. So we can actually help our children practice this. So if we take a bedtime routine, for example, we can ask our child, what do you need to do before you get into bed? The answer might be brush my teeth, wash my face, get into my PJs. Obviously, if they don't know, we can help them with the steps. Then what we want them to do is we want them to actually use their hands to gesture and point the path that they would take while telling you the plan. So an example would be, if they have to go upstairs to the bathroom, they would point upstairs while saying, I will brush my teeth and wash my face. And then they would point in the direction of their bedroom and say, then I will get on my PJs and hop into bed. So just to link this is something that we do as adults, think of a time that you gave directions to someone, right? Did you just use words or did you pair these words with pointing and gestures? By adding the gestures to the words when you say a plan, it actually helps us engage our brains and imagine ourselves actually doing it, right? It's that mental dress rehearsal. This will strengthen our executive functioning skills, and it also increases the likelihood that we're going to complete the task successfully and not forget half of the steps or get distracted partway through. Make it match is another strategy. So this one is particularly useful if your child has difficulty getting ready for things like leaving the house, extracurricular activities, morning or bedtime routines, or in this case, getting ready for some learning at home. So we would start by taking a photo of what done looks like. So in these examples, you can see the children are getting ready to go to school. Another example could be a photo of a student who has their home learning space set up with all their supplies, they're seated, they're focused, they're ready to learn. So we snap a photo of this, of done. And then what we do is we can ask our child what aspects of the photo make it done, right? So what's the criteria for done? For example, they could be dressed, have their computer, books, pencil, glass of water, etc., and they're seated and ready to go. So we've snapped the photo, we've asked them what's the criteria for done, what are the things that make it done, and then we want them to tell the plan to match the picture, right? What steps are they going to take? They might say, I'll go to my room, get dressed, get my computer, bring it to the table, then I'll go to the kitchen, get my water, and bring it back to the table. The idea here is that we want them to verbalize their plan. And just like we mentioned, it does help to encourage them to gesture or point as they say their plan. All right. So a final strategy that I'd like to talk about today is get ready, do, done. So this is a way of breaking down and approaching a learning task. So it's really helpful for lots of children, but particularly for those who may have difficulty organizing and gathering materials, starting tasks, breaking them into manageable steps, and understanding what it means to be done or finished, right? So those kids like myself, where I just don't even know where to get, like, how to get started, right? So I'm going to use baking a cake as kind of an example to introduce this strategy. So when I want to bake a cake, I don't know about you, but I always end up, start by looking at the photo, right? I want to see what the finished product looks like so I know what I'm making. So you start by asking yourself, what will it look like when I'm done? Is there an example I can look like, right? You're going to begin with the end in mind. Then we work backwards, right? I decided that I like the look of that cake. I know what it's going to look like. Now I want to look at the steps, or in this case, the method. So you ask yourself, what do I actually need to do? How long will each step take, right? And then lastly, you look at the ingredients. Do I have everything I need? what do I need to pull together? Where do I need to get the things maybe that I don't have immediately on hand? Now we've got our plan and we're going to spring into action, right? You gather your ingredients and supplies that you need, you go through your steps and you achieve the finished product, right? And hopefully your cake looks like the cake in the picture. Or put into this framework, you got ready, you do, and are done. So you can see how we planned with the end in mind, and then we worked backwards. Then we carried out our plan. Once we begin our plan, you can see that the colors actually relate to a traffic light. When we gathered the ingredients, we were proceeding slowly, right? We hit the gas, green light go through our steps, and then red light stop once we're done. So this is an example for a more complicated project, perhaps involving research, right? So this is applied to a learning type task. So we start by identifying what done is. So in this case, it would be a completed note-taking graphic organizer with 4 sources. So in that done section, we don't have to have exactly what it will look like, but we can actually have the general idea and the criteria, right? So as long as it's clear what the components of done are, that's what we want in that column there. And then we take a hop back and we look at do. What are the steps that we need to do? Well, we need to open up the website or the source. We need to read, and then we're going to need to write on the graphic organizer. We need to include the name of the source, key information, and the main idea. Again, hop back. What do we need to get ready now that we know the steps? What materials do we need? Well, we're going to need a computer. We'll need our list of websites or sources that we previously had outlined. We'll need our actual graphic organizer and a pencil, right? So we write these down. At this point, the plan is set. We can then ask our child to briefly tell us their plan. We can set a timer or use an analog clock at this point if we want, and then step away to encourage them to work through it with some independence. So this strategy is quite flexible. We can use it for older children. We can use it for younger children. Obviously, with younger children, it would be more pictorial rather than language-based. But it's a really flexible schedule. Again, that pairs nicely with a timer or an analog clock to encourage some of that independence. So that brings us to the end of our strategies. So at this time, I just encourage you to input any questions that you might have into that chat bar, please. We'll do our best to address those. And while we're getting our questions, I'll just share the videos and some of the resources with you. So 2 more slides and then we'll get to your questions. So following this session, you'll get links to some videos. There's 3 different videos. The first one is entitled Routines. The second one is Schedules. And then the third one is Executive Functioning Skills, where we go into more of those strategies like Ready, Do, Done and the Make It Match that will support the individual learning plans and activities for learning at home. And these are some of the resources. So the first website is from Sarah Ward. So a few years ago, our district was so fortunate to participate in a professional learning series with Sarah Ward. She's a renowned speech language pathologist who specializes in supporting children and adolescents with executive function skills. And many of the strategies we share today come from our learning with her. And then we've got Heart Mind Online, selfreg.ca, self-regulation, Castle, and Understood, as well as Smart But Scattered, and Dr. Stuart Shanker's book, Self-Reg. So all fantastic resources. Feel free to explore them, ask any questions that you may have. We're here and happy to support any way we can. So thank you so much. I know that was a lot of information, but I so appreciate learning alongside you today. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Allison. We have a couple of questions in our chat bar. I'm going to read them aloud, and we will figure out who the best person on our team in the background to answer. The first one is from Stephanie, and the question is, with teenagers dealing with time and time management for complex tasks or homework, what methods can we use to help them manage? For example, writing an essay. It's difficult to estimate and manage time needed for the task. So do we have someone on our team that wants to tackle that one?
Sure, I'd be happy to come in on that one.
Awesome,
I think probably, thank you, Stephanie, for that question. And I think probably after you posted it, Alison went on then to give some ideas about how to tackle that with the get ready, do done process. And also some of the calendar work. I find that with teenagers, particularly where there are complex and multi-step homework assignments and things, that the post-it notes on the calendar can be quite helpful. If you've helped someone break down that that multi-step activity, you can put the post-it notes on the calendar and then move them along as things get completed. They can come off, or if things are having to be postponed further into the week, the post-it note can move along. And why that's helpful is often when you're learning that technique, you can see that things are beginning to build up. So if you've postponed something from Monday to Tuesday, then that's on top of the things that were already scheduled for Tuesday. And if you then postpone them further, you can start to see how the post-it notes build up later on into the week. And it can be quite a useful technique to visualize the time that's involved and how to plan a little bit better. So I find that quite helpful. I think the also working with teenagers and younger children to guesstimate time when it can be just part of an everyday activity. So saying to someone, you know, we have to do this task. How long do you think it's going to take? Have a guesstimate, and then at the end reviewing how long it actually took. So you're starting to teach someone what that amount of time is, the amount of time required to do a task. So it doesn't need to be the homework task itself. It can be just daily activities or trips, things like that. I find those are quite useful techniques. But Alison already talked about, you know, mapping it out and get ready, do done, and those kind of techniques that will be helpful in terms of planning some of the multi-step assignments that your students are working with. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you, Morey. A few people have asked in the chat about whether a recording will be made available of our session today, and the answer is 100% yes. We've recorded this specific live event, and it will be found on our parent resource page as soon as possible, along with the 3 videos that Allison has made to supplement today's learning session. She has made a really detailed video around planning, organization, and executive functioning skills, and we will include those on our parent resource page on our West Vancouver Schools website as well. And we will also post the links of all the websites that she's mentioned in the last couple of slides she has shown. Another question, I'll read it aloud and then one of our teammates can jump in. For teens, how can we support them to have a plan for their day? They are reluctant to involve parents. How can we how can we get more involved with their schoolwork? They spend a lot of time on social media without planning. Could you introduce some strategies to support them to help them have breaks from social media?
I might jump in here.
Awesome. Thank you. Kristen Sikovic, one of our behavior analysts.
So yes, sometimes including or getting teens to be more involved in their work is tricky. But I think it's really important to make sure that any kind of social media, any kind of device time, any kind of free time has to be almost looked at as a reward. So once they've completed their expected routines and expectations, then they can have time for their own stuff. And I think we do it too. We just have more executive functioning skills to plan, but we often are like, okay, well, first I'm going to get this email done, and then I'm going to sit and read my book, or whatever the case may be. So it's almost teaching them that same skill set. So first you actually have to get done what you don't actually feel like doing, and then you can have your free time to engage in your leisure activities, and that often looks like social media for teenagers. So again, just kind of looking at it as more of a reward base rather than social media is available all day, every day, because when that's the case, they're likely not going to get what they need to get done, even though they don't necessarily feel like it.
Kristen, the next question kind of relates to this one, and it's, are there any tools that relate more to teens and cultivating motivation and enthusiasm? So you've kind of addressed this. Is there any other suggestions that you have for our parents today?
Motivation and enthusiasm are tricky, especially for sometimes for teenagers. Again, it really looks like they're motivated by devices, and a lot of times that is the case. So I think that just ensuring those devices and those motivators are kept sort of contingent, which means kept once the non-preferred tasks are complete, then they can engage in those preferred tasks. And sometimes we have to get creative, and if it's not necessarily devices, it's just kind of being as creative as possible to think of what is actually motivating and what is my child's jazz toy, essentially. So we gotta find those things and use them strategically, not just sort of all day, every day.
Wonderful, thank you very much. I think we'll just wait one more minute and see if there's any other questions out there. And if not, we will wrap things up. All right. So, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that the ideas and concepts that have been shared have been helpful to support you in supporting your children with remote learning. As I've already said, there will be a posting of today's recording of this session along with many other resources we have planned for you, which will be found on our West Vancouver Schools website under the Parent Resources page. I want to give a big thank you to the West Vancouver Schools team, Maureen McLean, Kristen Sikovich, and Sarah Hines for being there to support our session today, and a really big thank you to Alison DeBeer for taking the lead on today's session and for creating all of the accompanying videos that you will have access to. I appreciate all the work our parents and families have been doing to support remote learning, and I appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Wishing everybody a great day. Thanks, everyone.